There are moments in history when the impossible becomes possible, when the very fabric of creation bends to reveal the hand of the divine. This is the story of one such moment, a night when water stood as walls, when fear transformed into faith, and when an entire nation walked between the depths on dry ground. The sun had long set over the wilderness of Egypt, and the camp of Israel stretched across the sand like a vast sea of humanity. 2 million souls, perhaps more, had followed Moses out of bondage just days before. They carried with them the unleavened bread of haste, the gold of their former masters, and something far more precious, the promise of freedom. Yet as the cool desert wind whispered through their tents that night, freedom seemed more distant than ever. Behind them, rising like a storm of dust and fury, came the army of Pharaoh, 600 chosen chariots, the finest warriors of Egypt, their bronze weapons gleaming in the fading light. The thunder of hooves and wheels carried across the desert, a sound that spoke of vengeance, of recapture, of death. Pharaoh's heart, which had been broken by 10 plagues, had hardened once more. The God of Israel had demonstrated his power time and again, yet pride is a fortress that even divine judgment struggles to breach. And before the Israelites, stretching endlessly towards a horizon, lay the Red Sea. Its waters were deep, its currents treacherous, its crossing impossible. The people found themselves trapped between the sword and the sea, between their past and their promised future, with no visible path forward. This was not merely a military crisis. It was a crisis of faith, a test that would define the character of a nation being born in the wilderness. The people who had witnessed the Nile turn to blood, who had seen frogs cover the land, who had survived the death of Egypt's firstborn whilst their own children lived, now face a moment that seemed to contradict everything they had been promised. Had God led them into the desert only to have them slaughtered? Had their liberation been merely a cruel prelude to destruction? The voices rose in the camp, voices edged with terror and accusation. They turned to Moses, the man who had promised them deliverance, and their words cut deeper than any Egyptian sword. Were there not enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Did we not tell you in Egypt to leave us alone, to let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve them than to die here in this desolate place. Moses stood between his people and their fear, between their present terror and God's promised future. He was 80 years old, a man who had spent 40 years in Pharaoh's palace and 40 years in the wilderness, learning lessons that would culminate in this single night. He had argued with God at the burning bush, insisting he was not eloquent enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough for such a calling. Yet God had seen in Moses what Moses could not see in himself. A leader who would trust not in his own strength, but in the strength of the one who sent him. And so Moses spoke, his voice carrying across the frightened camp with an authority that came not from certainty in himself, but from certainty in his God. Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. It was a remarkable statement, given the circumstances. An army approached from behind. The sea blocked their path ahead, and Moses told them to be still, not to fight, not to flee, not to negotiate, but to be still, to watch, to witness, to wait for God to act. In a world that celebrates action, that rewards those who seize control of their circumstances, Moses called his people to the most difficult discipline of all, trust. The pillar of cloud, which had led them by day since they left Egypt, now moved from before them to behind them. It came between the Israelites and the Egyptians, bringing darkness to one side and light to the other. Throughout the night, neither army could approach the other. It was as if God himself stood as a barrier between his people and their enemies, giving them time, giving them space, giving them one more opportunity to believe. Then the Lord spoke to Moses with words that would echo through eternity. Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move forward. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. Move forward. When logic says stop, when fear says retreat, when circumstances say surrender, God says move forward. Moses lifted his staff, that simple shepherd's rod that had become the instrument of divine power. He stretched out his hand over the sea, and what happened next defied every law of nature, every expectation of the human mind. The Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind throughout the night. Not a gentle breeze, but a gale of divine force that roared across the waters like the very breath of God. The wind did not merely push the waves aside. It held them suspended, creating walls of water on both sides. Hour after hour through the darkness, the wind blew and the waters parted, and the seabed emerged not as mud or marsh, but as dry ground upon which an entire nation could walk. Imagine standing at the edge of that pathway. To your left, a wall of water rising high above your head. Every fish, every current, every drop held in place by invisible hands. To your right, another wall, equally impossible, equally magnificent. Before you, a highway through the depths, wide enough for families with children, for flocks of sheep and herds of cattle, for the elderly leaning on staffs and the young running ahead with wonder in their eyes. The first steps must have been the hardest. Who would go first into that corridor between the waters? Who would trust that the walls would hold, that the wind would not cease, that the sea would not come crashing down upon them? But faith is always a journey that begins with a single step, and someone took that step, and then another, and then the entire nation began to move. Through the night they walked, 2 million souls passing through the depths as if walking through a valley on dry land. The walls of water never wavered. The ground beneath their feet remained firm. Children who had been born in slavery now played between the walls of the sea, their laughter echoing in a space where only fish should swim. The elderly, who thought they would die in bondage, now crossed through waters that had seemed impossible to cross. Every step was a miracle, every breath a testament to the power of the God who makes ways where there are no ways. And in the morning watch, as the last of the Israelites emerged on the far shore, the Egyptians, driven by rage and pride, pursued them into the sea. Pharaoh's finest warriors, men who feared nothing, drove their chariots between the walls of water. Perhaps they thought if the Hebrew slaves could cross, surely Egypt's mighty army could follow. Perhaps they had grown so accustomed to victory that they forgot they were not merely pursuing an army, but defying the God who had already humbled their nation 10 times over. But the Lord threw the Egyptian army into confusion. The wheels of their chariots came off, making them difficult to drive. Panic spread through the ranks as the warriors realized they had entered a trap from which there was no escape. They began to turn back, crying out that the Lord was fighting for Israel against Egypt. But it was too late. They were caught in the midst of the sea, and the appointed time had come. The Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal place. The walls of water, which had stood through the night by the power of God's word, now collapsed with thunderous force. The Egyptians tried to flee before it, but the Lord swept them into the sea. The water covered the chariots and horsemen. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. That morning, Israel saw Egypt dead on the seashore. The army that had terrified them, that had pursued them, that had seemed invincible, now lay lifeless beneath the waves. The threat was gone. The enemy was defeated. The past was behind them, and the future, though uncertain, was theirs to walk into. And the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant. It was not merely relief they felt, but reverence. They had seen with their own eyes what their children would speak of for generations, what would become the defining moment of their identity as a nation. They had witnessed the impossible become possible, and in that witnessing, their faith was born. This story is not merely ancient history. It speaks to every soul who has ever stood trapped between an approaching threat and an impossible barrier. To everyone who has cried out in fear and heard only the sound of their own heartbeat. To all who have wondered if God truly sees, truly cares, truly acts. The Red Sea moment comes to each of us in different forms. Perhaps it is a diagnosis that seems insurmountable, a circumstance that appears unchangeable, a future that looks impossible. We stand at the edge of our own seas, and God whispers the same words he spoke to Israel. Move forward. Faith is not the absence of fear. The Israelites were terrified. Faith is not the presence of perfect understanding. They could not comprehend how the sea would part. Faith is simply taking the next step when God says to move, trusting that the one who led you to the edge of the sea will lead you through it. The walls of water will hold not because you are strong, but because he is faithful. The path will remain not because you deserve it, but because he has promised it. And when you reach the other side, when you look back and see that the thing which seemed impossible to cross is now behind you, when the enemies that pursued you are swept away by the same waters that stood as walls to protect you, you will understand something profound about the nature of God. He does not merely rescue. He transforms. He takes slaves and makes them free. He takes the terrified and makes them trusting. He takes the impossible and makes it a testimony. If you are standing at the edge of your Red Sea today, know this: the same God who parted the waters for Israel is the God who sees you now. He has not brought you this far to abandon you. The sea before you may look insurmountable. The enemies behind you may seem overwhelming. But there is a path through the depths that only faith can see. And when you take that first step, when you move forward in trust rather than retreat in fear, you will discover that the walls will hold, the ground will be firm, and the impossible will become the testimony of God's faithfulness in your life. If this story has stirred something in your spirit, if you have seen yourself standing at the shore of your own impossibility, I encourage you to share your reflections in the comments below. Let this community be a place where we remind one another that our God still makes ways through the sea. Consider subscribing to the Scriptures Live, where we continue to explore these timeless narratives that speak to the deepest places of the human heart. And if this message has blessed you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the God of the Red Sea is still the God who fights for his people today.